Ladies and gentlemen, to honor America and those brave men and women who protect us and ensure our freedom, I ask you to please join me in the singing of our national anthem. Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs were singing air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Mr. Newman. Would Mr. Kevin Neff of the American Legion Post 526, chaplain, come to the stage and lead us in the invocation.
He's got a good voice.
Lord, you're the creator of all that is. Our gracious Heavenly Father, you've created us. You know our hearts have made known your love for us. We thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to gather this day in a world you created for us to explore, the moon, planets, solar system, and universes. We thank you for adventurers and explorers and those that supported them through science and other means. Heavenly Father, we celebrate our adventure to the moon and the possibilities beyond. Thank you for those that have laid an adventurous path in the world in which we live and you have created. Almighty God, so many of us have served in all branches of the service in times of war and peace. As such has been true throughout the generations. We are here to recognize and reflect on those who preserve our freedom, sacrificed, and may have given all. We come this day with thankful hearts. We give thanks to you for your bounty of your blessings, for sharing between peoples, for the love of family and friends. Loving and eternal God, source of the light that never dims and the love that never fails, by all our conflicts, by all our aspirations, by all our fears, by all our joys and sorrows, by life and death itself, teach us and lead us. Amen.
Hey, it is my distinct pleasure at this time to introduce our very own Fairborn astronaut, United States Air Force retired Colonel Gregory H. Johnson. Now, instead of reading off what's on the back of your program that has Colonel Johnson's background, I want to say a few personal comments about Colonel Johnson. One of our primary goals in holding this event is to introduce and to encourage young people to get involved in science and technology. I know when I was growing up, as I mentioned before, during the space program, I remember, this tells you how old I am, watching the moon the night that they landed 50 years ago and thinking, there are human beings up there. And up until just a couple hours ago, they were still there 50 years ago. They left the following day. Colonel Greg Johnson has been a big part of that effort to increase our knowledge and expertise about scientific facts and programs. He has dedicated his life to expanding what we know about the universe. It's my personal hope that several of the young people in this audience today will be inspired by Colonel Johnson to follow in his footsteps. Perhaps some of the young Eagle Scouts sitting in the back. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to introduce a true American hero and a good friend to all, Colonel Greg Johnson.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Please sit down. I just learned from my brother that my dad wrote the song that the band was playing prior to this presentation. That's absolutely amazing. You're going to hear more about my dad in a second. Let me get this thing going right here. This song, Japata, I just didn't realize that my dad had written it. That's really cool. So thank you, Dan. It's always wonderful to be back in Fairborn, where my brother and I and my sister went to high school. I got here, I should have gotten here a little earlier. We were kind of working technical difficulties, and that's always a challenge when people are already here. But I took the time to drive around the high school. This used to be Fairborn Park Hills, way back. Yes, class of 1980. Whoa, class of 1979, I guess it's been 40 years, right, for my brother. So let's hear it for Park Hills. So I was telling the band leader, Aaron, in the back, who's been helping work out the technical details, and remember Mr. DePiro and Dr. Maloney way back, and how many performances we had on the stage working the technical stuff. It was the same screen, I think, that we had way back in the day. But there's so many ghosts in this room, so many memories. It was so special to me, and it's special to be back here again. I'd like to thank everyone who helped support this, Troop 162. Thank you very much. You guys look sharp. And the Civic Band, you all are awesome. We've played together before. Gary might have something for you all after this, by the way. Oh, you're nodding your heads, okay, so you've already gotten it. To the community who is supporting the Veterans Memorial, I mean, that's really why we're here, Dan, is to acknowledge a rich community of veterans. I've got one of my Air Force Academy classmates back in the room. It's crazy. There's so many connections at test pilot school, graduate, a little bit younger class. I know I'm getting kind of gray here. But it's just so fun to be back here. Today we're going to have fun. Hopefully the presentation is going to work for us, but if it doesn't, then we'll keep talking anyway. It's a little bit warm, but if you want, I'll give you the full version, because there's a video, about a 10-minute video of my second shuttle flight that I don't show much because it's kind of long, but Aaron's going to get the lights down, and it's going to be really, really fun to watch the video. So today we're going to talk about space shuttles, we're going to talk about space stations. I've spent the entire weekend in Wapakoneta celebrating the 50th anniversary of the lunar landing. Just an incredible weekend, so many activities. I probably look like I have lots of energy because I'm excited to be here, but it's been an incredible weekend. I just drove back down from Wapakoneta just an hour ago. So without further ado, I will start the presentation here. I think I'm just going to be clicking the slides myself. And we can lower the lights a little bit, Aaron, that'd be great, so that we can see these. So what you see here is kind of the spectrum of the space program. What we had over 5 decades ago, starting way back when there was the space race. The International Space Station, you're going to hear a lot about that today. That's our current space program. I was up in Wapakoneta, and several people said, oh yeah, I'm really sorry that the space program was over in 2011 when the shuttle retired. The space program has not been more vibrant. We just retired the space shuttle to make way for new technologies. One of the groups launched just yesterday to the International Space Station on the Soyuz, but we're going to replace that with a couple U.S. versions of transport to the International Space Station in the next year or two. But there's more to come. We're going to be going past low Earth orbit. We're going to set up a space station between here and the moon. We're going to go to the moon. We're going to go to Mars. And guess what? We're going to go further into our solar system, deeper into our solar system, or out of our solar system. It's just going to take time, but it's going to happen. If you imagine the conversation that Christopher Columbus had with Queen Isabella about, 6 decades ago or so, I guess maybe 5 or centuries, I mean. She gave him 3 bags of gold, and I think she wanted a return on her investment. And she probably had no idea that Christopher Columbus going to help discover the East Indies would lead to the amazing new world that we have today. It took centuries, though. I don't think it's going to be centuries before we do some meaningful exploration outside of low Earth orbit, but it's going to happen. And it's actually the kids that are going to come up with the technologies to do that, to go better, faster, and cheaper out into space. So that's why I have Mars up there. It's, you know, Moon, Mars, a near-Earth asteroid, you know, Saturn, or the next galaxy. It's all going to happen. All right, so before I get to talking too much about space, I want to do something special to me and my brother, and I'd like to dedicate this presentation to somebody very special, to a lot of people here in the community. Actually, right before the show, I met a gentleman who was in the Rotary with my dad here in 1985. But Harold Johnson's our dad. He's from this area. He was a director of the Air Force Band of Flight, a musician. My brother was a musician. I guess I'm the only male in our immediate family that wasn't a musician. But very proud of his music here and around the world as a band leader. But my point is not really about his music, but about his service. He passed away 15 years ago, but he's been teaching me from his grave about service. He was in the band boosters here at then Park Hills High School. I didn't know what he was doing in the background. He just did it without taking any credit. He was with Rotary. He was a Scout Council Commissioner even after we left home. And a person of service that I'm only now starting to understand the sorts of things that he did for his community, his family, and his world. So on the day after the 50th anniversary of the lunar landing, I want to share, I'm 57 now, so I was 7. How old are you in the front, by the way?
9.
You're 9, okay. So I was a little younger than you. And I was at my grandparents' house. Mom and Dad woke us up past our bedtime to watch a black and white TV to see Neil Armstrong step on the moon. And that was the moment that set the bit for me, where it planted the seed of, wow, that would be a really cool thing to do. And my brother will tell you, they probably were laughing a little bit, but I didn't think it was going to happen either. But my point is, yeah, I got lucky. It took a long time, 40 years. But what's really, my point to kids is that, yeah, okay, I'd never thought I'd actually be able to be an astronaut, but what I didn't do is say, no, I can't be. Because if you say you can't, then it's a 100% chance that it won't happen. But for me, I kind of had that dream. I got really lucky. I met some really neat people along the way. I see some of my school teachers actually right out in the audience, Mr. Sewer, Ms. Fry, and there's probably a couple others. Working hard, pursuing the dream, and then eventually it doesn't really matter what you want to do. You can achieve it in this country and in this world today. So that's really special to me, and that's why I was in Wapakoneta all weekend. So this was the high school picture, long hair. I thought it was going to be Top Gun. Actually, Top Gun's a Navy thing, but the equivalent in the Air Force is what I was going to be. Eventually started flying fighter aircraft, and eventually was influenced by several people along the way. This person right here is Charlie Bolden. He flew in space 4 times, but I met him in 1992. Now this is 2011, many years later, but I met Charlie Bolden, and if Neil Armstrong was the person who planted the seed for me, he was the guy who brought it to reality and said, hey, you just got back from Desert Storm, you're an engineer, because I went and listened to him talk back in 1992 when the space station Freedom passed by 1 vote. And he had just been to the Hubble Space Telescope once, and he said, hey, you can do this. You need to go to test pilot school. It was because of his advice that I went to test pilot school. So these little touch points in our lives, from our parents, from our teachers, and from people that are our heroes, can make a big difference. And that's maybe a message to all the adults out here, that everything you say to kids can really influence their future. And when Mr. Sewer threatened to give me a B in one of my classes, I'm just kidding you, Mr. Sewer, but I learned a lot from that lesson. And so, you know, thank you for challenging me. Thank you very much. Okay, so 1998 is when the application went in, and you mix the combination of preparation and getting lucky. I joined the class of 1998. Can we lower the lights just a little bit so everybody can see these? You might notice a really young guy right here. Okay, yeah. But 1998, that was 21 years ago. Took 10 years to fly the first shuttle flight. I had the honor of flying with 2 Navy commanders for my shuttle. So this is the first one with Dom Gorey. This is the crew that was diving right at the beginning of the show. It was Easter of 2008 that we did that diving. We had the half day off and we're diving around on the space station. The launch was at night. It was a crazy, crazy ride. Can we be a little bit dimmer on the lights? That'd be great. Awesome. Light, sound, vibration, acceleration. Space shuttle launches were amazing. And the launches now are equally amazing. So if you have the opportunity to watch one of these launches in person, it's a spiritual event. Space shuttle, of course, was like a 18-wheeler. You know, the people are here and the payloads are back here. We took up the Japanese Kibo Lab and another robotic hand that we assembled in space. Here's a spacewalk. Here's the new Japanese piece we installed back in 2008. And then part of the space station, and then our beautiful planet below. Check out the atmosphere. Very, very fragile looking from space. Spacewalkers crawling around on the space station. Here's the robotic hand, the special purpose dexterous manipulator. We put it together, took 3 spacewalks, but it's an infinitely configurable robotic hand that can substitute for a spacewalker, and of course it doesn't risk human life by doing it. It's just really slow. Here's what the space station looked like in 2008. When we left it, notice the solar array had not been installed yet, as well as the cupola, the bay window at the bottom of the space station. That had not been put on the space station yet. Fast forward 3 years, 2011. This was my second and final shuttle flight. The commander was another Navy guy. Mark Kelly. He's one of the more famous astronauts. He's actually running for the U.S. Senate now in Arizona. This is our Star Trek copycat photo. If I had pointy ears, I would have worn them, and we had several veterans. This guy went to the Hubble Space Telescope. He's the guy who had the record of the most time in space at the time. We had an Italian, and then another Greg Chomatov, who was also an Eagle Scout. It was a day launch that time. We launched through another cloud deck. This time, the F-15 buddy of mine took this photo as we were flying about Mach 2, 90 seconds after liftoff. And approaching the space station this time were the AMS, the Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer, and the ELC-3. The reason I tell you about those payloads is those are going to be part of the video that we're going to watch here in a couple minutes. The AMS, the Alpha Magnetic Spectrometer, was really the reason that STS-134 was manifested. NASA only had 133 shuttle missions on the manifest, but Congress made NASA fly this 134th shuttle flight because of this $2 billion cosmic particle detector that needed to be put up on the space station. NASA didn't want to do it, so Congress said, you will do it. So they added the shuttle flight, and so I was lucky enough to slide right in for that second shuttle flight. We use the robotic arm to move the payloads around. Here you can see the ELC-3 with the shuttle's payload bay, or the shuttle's robotic arm. And here we're handing off the ELC-3 with the shuttle arm to the space station robotic arm. And use the robotic arm also to install the AMS on the top of the truss. Here's a spacewalk. It's really a space crawl, you know, because they're crawling around with their hands, and the shoes are pretty pointless if you think about it in zero gravity. They trained on the Earth, so that's why they have shoes on their EMU spacesuits. But in space, these things are not useful at all. It's kind of ironic and funny. I never got to do a spacewalk, but I fed them, I kicked them out the door, I helped them back in, I fixed their purple fingernails, and other support for these spacewalks. There were 5 spacewalks on the first shuttle flight and 4 on this one, so I got to experience a lot of those spacewalks. I was actually kind of jealous. But you know, the pilot is not allowed to do spacewalks in general. So the pilot instead is the butler and the maid and the janitor and the plumber and things like that. This gives you a sense of scale of how huge the space station is. There's a person out there on a spacewalk. Here's the AMS. I really don't want this person to kick the AMS because it was an expensive experiment. And then here's another spacewalker crawling around on the outside of the truss. This photo is a lot like the photo that Neil Armstrong took when they first landed on the moon. Here Mike Fink has taken the photo of Greg Chomutov on the top of the space station. Here's the module we took up on the first shuttle flight. This is obviously on the second shuttle flight, but it has all the elements of what's going on. He's on the top of the truss, a beautiful view of the world, and our beautiful planet below. This is what the space station looked like in 2011. It was the final flight of Space Shuttle Endeavour, and you'll get to see a video that kind of explains the whole mission from soup to nuts. So this is the planet we live on. Planet Earth, Northern Lights, and these beautiful reds that you can't see from the ground. These are the Soyuz vehicles that we're using to go to and from the space station. At this time, they were just parked on the space station as a lifeboat for the 6 astronauts and cosmonauts who were on board. We had up to 13 people on the space station on my first flight. This was the second flight. We had 12. A couple Russians here. We were having a little bit of dinner together. Here's our exercise bike. Notice there's not a seat on it. There's no seats required in space when you're in zero gravity. There was a little bit of music in the genes on my side of the family, so I'm playing a 3-chord song called Brown Eyed Girl. And here's Katie Coleman with her flute and her hair, and there's Drew Feustel with Chris Hadfield's guitar. Sleeping in space, we zip ourselves up in these sleeping bags that are connected to kind of a hammock, and you could put the hammock anywhere, and sleeping is very, very comfortable in space. Yeah, I'm a roller though, and so I like to kind of be push back on something and roll, which is kind of pointless when you're in space. But I always kind of back myself up to a cool wall that, you know, of the metallic walls of the space shuttle. Coastlines, absolutely magnificent from space. Weather patterns. This is a Hurricane Wannabe in Western Africa. I don't know if it became a hurricane or not. Mount Everest from space. Mount Everest is right here. 29,000 feet high, but of course we're at 250 miles, so it's kind of hard to see with your depth perception the enormity of this peak. But only 250 miles off the surface was the space station as we orbited every 90 minutes. And the moon is 1,000 times further away than we were when we were in space. Most astronauts will tell you the view from space changes them. Here, we're off the planet. We're looking at the state of Florida. Again, the fragile atmosphere. Every breath we take here on the planet, all the billions of people are all breathing from this very thin film. And so it really does make us aware, looking at the Earth, of how beautiful and fragile it is and why it's important to take care of our ship, our spaceship Earth, and be crew members and not just passengers along for the ride. So with that, I'm going to share the video, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the space station. This was May 16th of 2011, so about 8 years ago. We're now up in space. We're going to open up the payload bay doors.
No messing around. I say it's a lot different than
Yeah, we weren't having fun up there. So after the Columbia accident, we started doing these flips to inspect our heat shields prior to joining up on the space station. So the astronauts have been living on the space station for 5 months, and we've only been in space for about a day and a half. To the universe and beyond. Actually, the outtakes to this are pretty funny, but I'm not going to share them today. Okay, so this is a tour of the space station. We're in the Japanese lab. We're looking ahead at the European lab. Now we're turning right, going down the US lab. There's Katie Coleman's hair. That's a Russian MiG-29 pilot. Mark, we got another Italian on board. And these guys are getting ready for a spacewalk. We had, as I said, 4 spacewalks on this flight. And now we're on the Russian side. Russian potty, and then going all the way to the back of the Russian side.
safe delivery of IMS to the station.
Well, thank you, Sam. I was just looking out the window of the orbiter, and AMS looks absolutely fantastic on the truss.
We are here in the Vatican together with His Holiness Pope Benedict XVI. Welcome aboard the space station, Your Holiness.
We have helped me and many other people to reflect together on important issues that regard the future of humanity. I wish you the very best for your work and for the success of your great mission at the service of science, international collaboration, authentic progress, and for peace in the world.
Okay, this was spacewalk number 2 of 4. They're getting ready to go out the door.
But we're wondering if Safety can use, this is a quote now, gentle backhand sweeping motion to get that washer away from the sun. Thank you, you'll help alleviate right here.
So living and working on the International Space Station and the Space Shuttle, just another day at work, exercising. I'm on deck with my bike jersey ready to go. Roberto is playing with his tools. And then we took a little time off to do some more dives like we did last flight. Yeah, that's the Thunderbird inverted multiple dive. So this is Greg Chomutov. He's a good Eagle Scout. He dove about 200 feet without touching anything. And he's got to get his feet together. So Mike Fink, as I said, had the record with the most time in space. He had 384 days, and I think it caused him to be a little crazy. And this was our safety officer. Okay, watch out! Oh my goodness. Okay, M&Ms, no hands. And then that's a ball of water with some M&Ms inserted. So there's ice cream in here. We shared ice cream with the station crew, had been up there for 5 months, and we took their experiments back to the Earth in this other freezer. And so they ate the ice cream and then put their future experiments in that freezer. So this is the final spacewalk of the space station assembly. About 1,000 hours outside for spacewalks over the 13 years. And the job is to hand this thing off to them on the top of the truss. So the Ninja ballerina grip, they just didn't want to push the thing away so it float away. It wasn't tethered because it was so long and heavy.
You're all with us in spirit, and this is really a new
that will long be remembered. Welcome home, brother.
Thank you. I love watching that video. I've watched it a few times. It was 8 years ago. And you can keep the lights right there because this is the view of the space station that we were assembling during that mission and another 35 prior, 35 shuttle missions. So the space station is an amazing vehicle. It's about the size of a football field. As I said, about 35 shuttle missions to put the space station together. The Japanese lab has 3 parts. On my first shuttle flight, we took up that little piece, stuck it right here, and then they took the lab up and then moved it over here. That's the external porch. They do experiments there. There's a European lab there, and then the US lab is here. The pressurized volume of the space station is about the volume of maybe a 6-bedroom house. But operationally, when you use the ceiling and the walls and the floors, it's really like being in a huge, almost like a school. I got lost in it a couple times because you get a little disoriented as a new shuttle guy up there only for 16 days. I actually went out of one module and just turned the wrong way. You could get disoriented in microgravity. The cupola is one of the coolest modules, as I said, was installed between my 2 shuttle flights, and the beautiful photos you see from the cupola ever since about 2010 or so, after the cupola was installed, you could see these 7 beautiful windows that just face our planet. Now we're on the Russian side of the space station. The Russians are our primary partner, but there are a total of 16 different nations that have played part in the assembly of the International Space Station. It's a 30-year design life. We started building the space station in 1998, so it should be good till 2028. But as we know, like with the B-52, it probably could be good through 2050, and I really hope that we don't abandon this wonderful facility. It's the only place that we can study physical and biological processes in microgravity, zero gravity. You know, Aaron can turn the light switches off here, but you can't turn the gravity switches off, right? If we did, we'd all float out of our chairs, bump into each other, grasp for the rafters or whatever you can grab, and it's just a thing that we can't do here in space. I mean, someday one of the 9-year-olds or the 7-year-olds or 11-year-olds, when they grow up, will figure out how to have a no gravity machine here on the Earth. But right now, this is the only place that we can study these things. And it's not about what we think we're going to learn. It's actually about the unknown unknowns. The AMS that I talked about earlier, the alpha magnetic spectrometer, its job was to better understand our universe, maybe discovering naturally occurring antimatter, dark energy. But really, the AMS, and here's the AMS right here, actually right there, has collected over 100 billion cosmic particles and is changing. It's proving that some of the models of our universe that were kind of based on Einstein are being disproven. We really don't know where that's leading. but the AMS has been up there for about 8 years, and we know that Newtonian physics and Einsteinian physics, but there's some holes, and now we know that some of the models are breaking down with these high energy particles that we can only collect outside of our atmosphere. So the space station is a wonderful facility for science and research, not only for understanding how to get further in space, but also how to solve problems here on the Earth. And we can talk more about that during the Q&A. So my final part of the presentation, I'd like to share a little bit about what we're doing this weekend. And that was in Wapakoneta, celebrating the 50th. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a little bit about the Apollo 11 crew and Neil Armstrong, because this, like I said, this was the moment that, my inspiration moment, and it probably was for millions of kids and adults around the world. So here's the crew, and as we know, two of the astronauts, Neil and Buzz, were spacewalkers, while the third, Michael Collins, was circling the moon. And I think there's been a lot on the TV. I've learned a lot about the Apollo 11 just this past couple weeks with all the different shows talking about it. But I'd like to talk about Neil Armstrong a little bit. Here he is as a kid. He was born in Wapakoneta. It was really exciting for me. On Friday night, we went to the Armstrong farm and hung out with his sister June and his brother Dean. I'd never met him before, and they met some of the astronauts that were up there that weekend. We met some of their family. I didn't realize that June Armstrong had 7 kids, and all their names started with a J. Unbelievable. But Wapakoneta is really proud of Neil Armstrong. That's not where he ended up living. He ended up living in Lebanon, Ohio, but he was certainly an Ohio astronaut for sure. Here he is in his Navy flight outfit, and he went into the Navy. He flew in the Korean War, and then went to Purdue, and then started flying in the test business. He was even, he's a Navy guy. He was a good pilot for a Navy guy. No, he was actually probably one of the best pilots out there at the time, which is why he was selected to command this mission. He had many records in various airplanes, and he jumped out of several airplanes, including the X-15. So here he is prior to his flight on Apollo 11. And I'd like to talk a little bit about his character and his personality, because that's what resonated with me throughout my career. Unlike some other astronauts out there, he was very humble. And he was not about himself, but he was about the mission. And he was very precise. I remember he came to our that group of 31 who you saw in 1998, my classmates. He came and visited us and talked to us. He talked for 40 minutes and never once mentioned landing on the moon. In fact, he just talked about flying and engineering and the Navy. And we're all kind of disappointed, really, because I wanted to hear about the lunar landing. But we did, of course, hit him up during the Q&A to get him to talk. But very unassuming, the perfect person to command Apollo 11. The launch was July 16th, so about 5 days ago, 50 years ago. And here's the landing, which happened at about 11:56 last night, 50 years ago. This is my final slide, and I wanted to talk about the patch, because the patch kind of speaks for itself. Most of the space flight patches that you see have people's names on them. But this group, and Neil Armstrong as the commander, realized that it wasn't about the crew members. It was actually about, their country, about the planet going to the surface of the moon. So Neil Armstrong is my hero. He was an asset to his state, his country, and his planet. All right, any questions out there? Well, I'd say that if you look at the airplanes 100 years ago, nobody was flying them, and now everybody's flying them. So the same thing's going to be with space. There's going to be a lot of people flying in space. All walks of life: teachers, medical doctors, physicists, engineers. No attorneys yet, but there'll probably be attorneys. I'm sorry, I'm kidding. I'm just making fun of I'm sorry. I'm a really serious person, by the way. But I'll tell you, if you want to be an astronaut, do what you love, and therefore you'll do it really well. And if you do well in something, and then you have to be lucky these days, but we're flying more and more, then that was my recipe. I was an okay pilot, and I was pretty lucky, and I got to fly in space. There was also another pilot named Greg Johnson, and we joked that together, individually we were 55%, but together we were 110%. So, all right, next question. Yes?
When do you get to be an astronaut?
The question is, when did I get to be an astronaut? I guess I was 21 years ago, so I must have been in my 30s. I guess I was 36 years old. Most astronauts are in their 30s, some 40s, and a few in their 50s. We had one astronaut who was 77, and there were a couple astronauts who were in their 20s. Other questions? Yes?
What was the food that the astronauts liked the best?
The question is, what is the food the astronauts like the best? With me, it was macadamia nuts. I love macadamia nuts. You throw them in zero gravity, they go straight, they bounce off the walls. M&Ms were cool too, because all the crew members, we all had our colors, and so it was kind of a morale thing. I could throw the blue M&Ms at Mark Kelly, and then I'd get the yellow M&Ms, blah, blah, blah. I also enjoyed things like shrimp cocktail. It's pretty good. I mean, we rehydrated a lot of foods. We had a galley, pretty high-tech galley that you put hot or cold water in it and rehydrate it, and it was really good food. And then we had these MRE type foods that you would stick in, they'd be in like a foil envelope, and you'd stick it into the convection oven, and that was good. Soup, I love soup here on the ground, and you could eat soup up there. People think, oh, you can't eat soup, but you just got to be careful. You just got to reach your spoon in there and just gently, it's jiggly, but you can eat soup. It'll stick to things. I mean, you can throw your soup on your neighbor and it'll stick on them.
So, did you guys play with your food more than you
So the question was, did we play with our food? And the answer is absolutely. You saw us eating lunch, and he was tossing that chicken up into the camera. But we did, everything in zero gravity was fun. Working was fun. Playing was fun, sleeping was fun, eating was a lot of fun. So you probably saw in the video, I was smiling most of the time. Other questions? Yes?
So for when I saw you were doing a rotation flip, I'm a person who has vertigo, and so if I bend over, I get like head pressure. You don't have any kind of pressure at all when you're moving around. You don't feel anything as far as...
Okay, so the question was related to those tumbles that I was doing when I hit my head on the duct tape. By the way, duct tape is really useful in space. You can do all kinds of things with duct tape. But so our vestibular system, the semicircular canals in our inner ears, there's fluid in them, and we all sit here in 1G, and we feel, and that's how we can close our eyes and point up. But in space, you don't have that gravity vector, and so your semicircular canals, they get confused when you first get up there, and the fluid is just floating around, and people do get vertigo just from going up into space. But once you get adapted to it about a day or two after, it's like you were born to live in space, and to heck with gravity. You can move huge objects, you can dart around like a bee. We were pretty clumsy at first when we got up there, but over time you get used to it. And so the reverse is also true when you come back. When we got into the gravity field after landing, many people were really dizzy. You saw the photo of us, the 6 of us standing there smiling. We were all like really dizzy, and if somebody ran real fast at the end, we'd all fall over, But yeah, so when I was spinning, there was a little bit of a sensation because of kind of the centrifugal force. If my head was right in the middle of it in the CG, then I probably wouldn't feel it, but because my head was outer, you could feel it a little bit, but it just didn't affect us. I mean, we could do all kinds of crazy things after a few days.
How does it similar to like in water, when people are in water playing around in your...
Okay, so the question is relating to water. So when we practice our spacewalks, we actually go into water, but water has friction. And so it's different. When you dive in water, the water slows you down. When you dive on the space station, you just keep going the same speed until you crash into somebody. So when you do little rotations in the water, it's really not the same sensation. Yes?
Yeah, I just recently read a book where it said that Neil Armstrong, in the week leading up to Apollo 11, he felt like he had a 90% chance of getting there and coming back safely. Does NASA study how that risk profile is going to change on a possible mission to Mars?
Okay, so the question was related to the risk of space flight, in particular Apollo 11, which from what, again, I was 7 years old at the time, but from what I understand, they kind of viewed it as a 50-50 proposition, not a 90% proposition. We were really lucky, actually, not to have an accident with the Apollo missions, of course, after the Apollo fire on the ground. We didn't lose any of those missions, and that was probably fairly improbable. How's that sound? So in the shuttle program, we lost 2 shuttles out of 135. So empirically, 1 in 67-ish, not quite safe enough for NASA, which is one of the reasons we retired the space shuttle, to maybe design something a little safer. These vehicles we're designing now, I think we were going for 1 in 1,000 chance, but I think that might be a little high. I don't think we can quite get there. Space flight does take, has its risks, and we all know about the risks, and anybody will sign up for it. But I think 1 in 1,000, it's probably more dangerous to drive in Houston than it is to fly on a 1 in 1,000 vehicle, but I'm kidding. But as far as going to Mars, that's going to be a tough mission. There's going to be a lot of risks, some risks that we haven't retired yet. So that's another argument for why we might go to the moon first, because it's a lot closer. Yes?
2 questions. One, do you still have to be isolated when you come back to make sure there's no bacteria that you're carrying from space when you did your mission?
Okay, so the first question, and there's extra charge for the second question, but no, I'm just kidding. So the first question was, do we still quarantine when we come back? And the answer is no. We quarantine prior for about a week to make sure that we don't catch anything that would infect the space station. But on the way back, we do a couple hours of medical testing, and then we're released to see our families and our friends. Yes? Oh, and the second question. I'm sorry, she gets the second question.
How long did it take you to readjust to Earth conditions after you came?
So the question was, how long did it take to adjust to gravity once we came back? It was about the same amount of time as it took to get used to gravity going up, about a day and a half. I tell this story a lot, and probably a lot of you have heard it, but I'll say it again. My first flight, my daughter was 10, and I was holding her here. I'd just gotten back. My first Diet Coke in 16 days here. I'm drinking it. Bubbles don't work good in space, so we didn't have soda pop. And the NASA administrator comes to shake my hand from this first flight, and of course, you want to shake the administrator's hand, and what you're going to normally do is take your Coke and put it in this hand and shake the hand, but my daughter was here. So instead, I just released it to shake his hand. And of course, my 10-year-old daughter, 1 year older than you, sir, very, very smartly said, Dad, why'd you drop your Diet Coke all over the NASA administrator's Cole Haan shoes? I said, because I thought it'd stay there, because we're calibrated to zero gravity. So it takes a while to get recalibrated, and we dropped crackers. We were really clumsy at first, and then we got used to gravity again. Yes?
Yeah, Greg, you were talking about the spacewalkers when you're on the International Space Station, that their fingers were purple when they came back in. So what's that all about?
Yeah, probably NASA would kill me for saying that. Well, talking about the health of the astronauts. But, spacewalks are hard. The suits, you can't have a perfect pressure. If you had a 14.7 PSI suit, you wouldn't be able to move. And if you had 0 PSI, you couldn't live. So the atmosphere inside the suit is, about 4 PSI or so. But that puts a lot of pressure on all the extremities of the body. The feet, for example, I heard a war story about the feet this weekend from one of the spacewalkers, and their fingers, their fingertips, as they're doing this work, everything that they're doing, they're using their hands, and they're grabbing things, and the human body is not built for spacewalks just yet, and the equipment is sufficient, but it's not perfect, and so their fingernails would take a hit. And I saw a few of those things fall off, so I'm just saying. Yes, right there.
What do you have to do to be an astronaut?
What do you have to do to be an astronaut? You have to be curious. You have to be enthusiastic. I think you should be positive. You probably should be a person that somebody wants to be locked up in a tin can with for 6 months. And you have to be good at something. You have to be able to do something for the crew, whether it's being a spacewalker or whether it's being, the medical doctor. Every crew had a medical doctor. Ours was a veterinarian. He said we were a bunch of animals. So you have to have something that you do that adds to the crew or they won't fly you. But now, like I said, more and more different occupations are going to go in space. When we get to another surface of the moon, I'm sure there's going to be attorneys up there because we're going to have land rights up there. So I'm kidding. If there's any attorneys in the room, I apologize. I'm just picking on attorneys today. I'll pick on musicians next time. Okay. Donna's laughing there. Yes, in the back.
How do you go to the bathroom, number one? And do they take your water?
Okay, I didn't hear the second question, but I'll answer the first one. So usually that question is asked by somebody just a little bit younger. Okay, so the question is, how do we go to the bathroom? And you said that's number one, and I won't interpret that to mean the liquid part. I'll tell you about number one and number two. So, toilets are operated with gravity. Right? That's how the things work. Shower heads, they work through gravity. So all those things we have in the bathroom, they're designed with gravity in mind. So when you take gravity out of the equation, you can imagine you have to kind of strap yourself down to the commode. You have to line things up, right? That's important. You got to open it up. The liquid and the solid part is separated. The solid part is collected through a hose, and everybody has their own very hygienic attachment, so no germs passing. And then and there's a mild vacuum in that hose, and it kind of just gently goes into a tank, which on the shuttle we just dumped it after a while. It'd fill up and we just dump it out there. The solids would go into this, it's like an outhouse almost, with a little bit of suction. It would freeze dry it very nicely down there, not smelly, and then we'd bring our number two back. Now the Russians, I pointed out the Russian toilet. They have that big can. They collect the number two in there, and they put it in a cargo ship, and it burns on reentry. So they literally burn their poop on the way back. So it's kind of floating around in our atmosphere, I guess. Yeah?
So when you are in the actual space shuttle with zero gravity, and then these spacewalkers are out walking around, how does all this affect the blood pressure?
Okay, so the question was about the blood pressure because we're in zero gravity. So we're learning about that. I just recently read that our hearts get more spherical in space, and we don't have the gravity field pulling our blood down into our legs. So our fluids shift, all the fluids, including the blood, which is why our heads look like tomatoes when we're in space. We also don't need as much water, and so our body just gets rid of a couple quarts of water. Almost, within a few hours, our brains figure out that we don't need all this water in our bodies, and we get rid of the water. And then we have to do what's called fluid loading when we come back. We have to drink a couple quarts of water so that we don't pass out when we get back to gravity. As far as your blood pressure, I don't think I ever had my blood pressure taken taken. But I can tell you that I do remember one time I was kind of just sitting there talking to my buddy, and my eyes felt like they were going to pop out. I mean, it was like I could feel the pressure in my head that might have been related to other fluids and maybe not the blood. Yes, all the way in the back. It's the superintendent of schools, by the way, asking the question.
When the shuttle docks with the space station, or when you're doing a spacewalk, or you're checking the heat shield, how fast are you traveling when you're doing those things?
That's a great question. So the question was, how fast are we traveling? So the beautiful Goldilocks perfect speed to stay in low Earth orbit at 250 miles is 17,500 miles an hour, or about 28,000 kilometers per hour for the metric people in the room. And so we're going around the Earth every 90 minutes, and that's why you see the sun popping up and going down every 45. So to answer your question, everybody's going 17.5, and then when we're doing maneuvers in relationship to each other, there's not much of a difference in the speed. For example, when we join up on the space station, we're closing at several miles per minute when we're pretty far away, but when we're within 600 feet, we're hand flying it, and 30 feet prior, we're just going 2 inches per second. So 17,500 miles an hour plus 2 inches per second. So essentially the same speed. So, but everything is traveling together in formation, 17,500 miles an hour. So I said that like 4 times. There's going to be tests on the way out. So 17,500 miles an hour, that's low Earth orbit. If you go 17.4, you'll fall back to the Earth. If you go 17.6, you'll go to a higher orbit. And then going to the moon, we were going 20,000 something miles per hour, 25,000, I think. Other questions? Yes?
How do you account for all the space trash that's in space? Is there any special systems or processes used to avoid any collisions?
Okay, so the question was related to the debris. Has anybody seen Gravity? Okay, well, I love Sandra Bullock, so I'm always going to watch movies that she's in. Yeah, it wasn't exactly accurate scientifically, but I love the movie. But they brought up the issue of space debris, and it's a minefield out there. Many satellites have had collisions, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff out there, as well as micrometeoroids and other things coming from other parts of the solar system. And so it's a fairly big risk. When we're launching, we're really careful not to run into anything while we're going, accelerating. Once we're up there in space, we're pretty predictable. We know where the space station's going to be, and so NASA and the U.S. government track the large objects, and we can actually get ourselves out of the way, called a debris avoidance maneuver. And so the space station does that quite often. But there's smaller pieces, the pieces that are pretty large but not big enough to track, are probably the biggest risk. And the space station right now, their biggest risk is that debris. So how do you get rid of it? Well, you have some really smart kids who figure something out. A laser, that could work. A Pac-Man in the space or something. There's a magnetic type thing, but we need to figure that problem out because it gets worse and worse over time. And like I said, it's a fairly big risk.
Is the space station completely solar powered? And also, what did the space station teach us about climate from their observations?
Okay, so is the space station powered solely by solar arrays? And the answer is yes. The space shuttle, we had fuel cells, which were expendable, which is why shuttle flights could only be a couple weeks. The space station, those solar arrays have, I won't say infinite power, right? You get yourself in trouble with that. But yeah, when I bought my first Gateway computer, it had a half a gig, and I thought that was infinite storage, right? But the space station has way more power than it needs. In fact, when we joined up with Endeavour to the space station, we gave them water and they gave us electricity, kind of like the Pilgrims, and which allowed us to have a 16-day mission. So the second question was about the climate, and it is true. We've got lots of sensors out in space besides human beings, but astronauts over time have noticed changes, for example, in the rainforests in Brazil. And those high-fidelity photos that we can take looking at the planet, you can see changes over time. I didn't experience that in my 2 16-day missions, but now we're sending people for a year, and so they might see differences in that time frame. Other questions? Yes. All right, thank you. Point out the kids for me. We have just a few more minutes. We'll keep going here, though. I know it's hot.
Did you see any volcanoes?
Did I see any volcanoes? No. But there were some astronauts who did. There was one astronaut, Jeff Williams, and I don't know the date, but it was about 10 years ago. He was the first person to see a volcanic eruption before anybody on the ground knew about it. So that was pretty cool. All the way in the back, yes.
How long can you operate outside the shuttle?
The question is, how long can you operate? You mean like in a spacesuit? It's about 8 hours. I don't know exactly what the record is, but it's a little bit more than 8 hours. But most space flight or spacesuit or spacewalks are about 7 or 6.5 hours because they want to keep their redundancy. And it also depends on, how hard the astronaut's breathing. If they're using up the air too fast, because truly, when you're on a spacewalk, you take everything with you, including the air that you're going to breathe. Yeah.
Were you usually in the U.S. module, and did you get to interact with the other modules, being the Russian and the Japanese?
Okay, so the question was, did we spend most of our time on the U.S. side? And yes, we did. And as a shuttle guy, I probably spent more time in the space shuttle as well. Space shuttle and then the U.S. side. It's really the U.S. and the kind of Western countries, and then the Russian side. But we went all over the space station. I wouldn't wander into the Russian side unless I had a reason, but we all did that, for different reasons. The Japanese and the European labs, we just went into them whenever we wanted to. It was kind of considered to be part of the, the main complex of the space station. And then finally, there was a little bit of maybe rivalry going on when we took that first Japanese piece up there. We had Takao Doi, who was a Japanese astronaut, and he put a big Japanese flag in that module. And I took up a flag that was actually flown for my dad, and I took it up to space, and I tacked it up into that module as well. And I said, yeah, the commander said that we have to have an American flag as well as a Japanese flag in your module. And it made him really upset. I was just kidding with him, but I was just joking too. The commander didn't say that. All right, over here.
You said that the spacecraft that are being in design now, when is NASA planning their own launch into space?
Okay, so I was talking about future vehicles. So NASA has contracted to 2 private companies, SpaceX and Boeing, to take crew up to the space station. And they let that contract about 5 years ago. And so now these vehicles are about ready to launch. They're about ready to test them unmanned this fall. And the first people on board will happen next year if everything's on time, but you know how that goes. But we've got 2 private company vehicles, but they're contracted by the U.S. government. They're paid by the U.S. government with SpaceX and with Boeing. It's been a very successful program, the Commercial Crew Program, to get people up from U.S. soil. So that's happening right now. There's another vehicle called the Orion, but I heard it got renamed recently, that's going to take us past low Earth orbit. We tested it a couple years ago, an unhuman occupied vehicle up to about 3,000 miles, and then it came back down. And so that vehicle is testing about every 2 years, and I think we'll get humans to outside of low Earth orbit by about 2022. So we're working on 3 different vehicles now to launch from U.S. soil. Yes?
Do the Chinese have their own space station?
The question is, do the Chinese have their own space station? And the answer is yes. It looks a lot like our space station. The drawings do. I'm just saying. And they're going to launch it here pretty soon in the next couple years. But I think that might be the next sort of space race with space stations and the Chinese. Yes?
Well, one more question. When I was young, I lived at Patrick Air Force Base, and guys involved with NASA and everything, so they had a contest, and I won this contest by asking I don't know which shot it was, but one Apollo mission, they took a spider up to space. So my question was, will it be able to build a web? And I don't know if the space station has taken other life form up to space to test.
Okay, so the question was related to life forms, taking them up into space and studying how they act and operate. So I didn't realize the Apollo program took spiders up to space, but I think I've learned that we have taken spiders up on the International Space Station, and their webs are really disorganized, but they somehow adapt, and after a few days, their webs are more orderly, which is really interesting. So all living organisms have a very strong ability to adapt. Humans, but also spiders. Ants are another thing. They've taken ants up to space and studied them. We take other small animals up to space. So these animals, I mean, this is like completely fresh research trying to understand how they adapt to space. I think we have time for, Dan is kind of leaning forward on his chair. I think we've got like 2 more questions and we'll call it a day. Yes, ma'am?
If you only had time for the rest of your life to talk about the thing that struck you as the most awesome moment, what was it?
Okay, if it was the only thing I could say for the rest of my life, what was the most awesome moment? That's a little bit like saying which of my 3 kids are my favorite, okay? So I'll kind of put it in 3 different categories. One is my most awesome moment was launch and landing. Those were awesome physically. Professionally, it's probably a tie between flying with a MiG-29 pilot. Politics has never made it up to space, and I was an F-15 pilot. And so you know what that means. It was really professionally rewarding. And installing that AMS and actually having it work when we flipped the switch, that was probably professionally. And personally, it was sharing a video teleconference with my wife and kids, starting in northern Ohio and going all the way to Madagascar. 20 minutes. I was in the cupola looking at the Earth with a wireless laptop floating, sharing the ride out the cupola with them as we're navigating across the Atlantic and across the Europe and then down the Sahara and then Madagascar, and then looking at the kids and learning about band and dance and Carrie's kindergarten class. So, all right, final question in front.
Would you talk for just a minute about what it's like to fly that huge space shuttle and execute a precision slow motion maneuver that's called docking?
Okay, so I'm asked to speak about 60 seconds on flying that space shuttle in close proximity to the space station. So the space shuttle is about the size of maybe a 737, so a pretty good size vehicle. But very precise flight control system. Very precise coming in on landing and very precise maneuvering up on orbit. And we have these tiny little Vernier jets, we call them. Vernier, I guess it's a French word, that have like 25-pound pulses to really fine-tune the flying of the vehicle. As we're approaching, the space station, orbital mechanics aren't like flying an airplane. It's different. When you go forward, you actually go to a higher orbit. When you slow down in relationship to the Earth, you actually fall. So you have to kind of pulse forward and then pulse down or up, depending on if you're going forward or backwards. So, but getting used to that took a fair amount of training, and but again, it was doable just like anything else, riding a bike. As far as the pilot and commander, we were doing the docking and the undocking. The pilot was the commander was at the controls as we docked, but both of us are doing it together and we both can do it. And then as the pilot, I got to undock and do the fly around, which is actually the most fun part. And you saw the fly around at the end of the video. And that was just staying at 600 feet all the way around the space station. So as a pilot, I just loved flying the space shuttle. It was a very precise vehicle, and I miss it.